Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Joel Hunter, host of Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth. And on today's program, we're going to be talking about adoption and foster care. And we've got three great friends and good colleagues of mine to do this. Let me start down at the other end of the table with Andrew Jones, who is a partner in the law offices of John Edward Jones, his daddy, who I know well. I'm at the age where I know everybody's dad, really better than them. But he, the interesting thing about Andrew is he himself is an adoptee. And we want to get into just a little bit of his program, but he's become a great advocate in this community for both adoption and foster care. He's the co-sponsor of a daddy-daughter dance, and we can get into a little bit of that too if you like. But he's not only an assistant state attorney, but he has this law practice of very human side. And that's really what we want to talk about when we're talking about this, not just the programs, but the human side of this. Next to him is my longtime friend and bookkeeper. You know, she's an accountant. She's a real estate agent. She's a professional woman that for years was the chief financial officer of one of the 50 largest churches in the country. And since then, she's helping us with our little startup of Community Resource Network. But the great thing about Twyla is that she, as a single person, has helped foster, let me get this straight, 11 children, several of those for 6 months and one for an entire year, as a single person. And so we want to see, how did a professional single person get into this? And then we've got our resident expert, Glenn Castle. He's my hero. Glenn is the director, the CEO and president, of Community-Based Care of Central Florida. And he's been an advocate for Florida's children for more than 20 years. And the CBC is the kind of the go-to organization for Seminole and Orange and Osceola counties when it comes to helping vulnerable children. And so I guess I want to start with you, Glenn. You have probably the best picture of all of us. By the way, don't you like our brightly colored shirts? We didn't coordinate this. We got on and go, hey, we're going to do a kids program. Let's wear bright colors. So anyhow, I digress. Let's go from the ridiculous to the sublime. Tell us right now kind of the status of Florida's children that don't have forever families yet.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on today. It's such an important subject, and unfortunately, a lot of times, one that doesn't end up getting talked about a lot. And I think maybe a lot of us would like to believe it's not possible that kids could be harmed by their parents, or a family could fall into such sort of peril that children become unsafe. Mm-hmm. In Florida, on any given day, there's about 13 or 14,000 children that are truly in foster care. They can't be with their parents. They can't be with a relative, grandma, grandpa, aunt, and uncle. And it's somebody that they didn't know before that now has accepted them into their home and is helping them find a pathway forward. And here in Central Florida, for us, it's about 650 children on any given day.
Wow, that's amazing. Let's go to the actual participants. Andrew, I want to ask about your experience. I've heard part of your story. Can you tell us part of the story of your adoption and you know, has that always been something that was on your mind, or was it just kind of like, yeah, I learned about it somewhere along the way and that's fine, but I was just like any other kid?
No, I mean, for me, it's kind of guided each step my entire life. And it's not just because I was adopted, but kind of the facts surrounding my adoption. My biological mother actually wasn't told that she was pregnant And so she wasn't actually medically diagnosed with being pregnant until 12 hours before she had me. Before that 12 hours, she actually tried with 3 different doctors and met with 3 different doctors to have an abortion. So I was that child that was given the chance to be adopted, that has since become an attorney, was an assistant state attorney for 7 years in a private law practice, have a family foundation that works on these issues. But I'm kind of the quiet advocate that I'll try to go and do as much as I can to make a difference. If someone asks me why, I tell them it's because of my faith. If someone asks me why my passion for children, I tell them it's because I'm adopted and I wasn't really supposed to be here. So I was given the chance to go out and hopefully encourage others to look at adoption, look at fostering as an option, but also kind of tie it back to the aspect that I wasn't really supposed to be here because of the abortion issue. And I know that's not what we're talking about, but for to me, they're both connected.
It's huge. Yeah.
And so those both inspire me to, do what I can to help on these issues.
That's harrowing. How good is God?
Yeah. I mean, it's only God that could hide that from doctors.
It's amazing. I'm not sure I've ever heard of somebody who didn't know they were pregnant until, well, we won't get into that. Hey, Twyla, yours is a really fascinating story to me, because most people, when they think of, okay, I could be responsible, at least temporarily, for a child's care, they just feel totally ill-equipped. They feel like, that child needs a full family full of brothers and sisters. We need parenting classes. We need all of that. The child deserves all of this. Here you are, a single professional woman. How did you consider this? How did this happen?
Well, Joel, it was a very clear, distinctive, direct call from God. And at the time, I didn't know any other single people who were fostering children, and was really apprehensive about it. But I knew that it was clear that God wanted me to pursue it.
Could you, let me dig down, because they're going to go, I wonder what he said. How did that come? Just in case it comes to me. Could you describe that? I mean, were you watching something? Did you see a kid?
I began to be, to run into it a lot, from articles to conversations to, a lot of different aspects. And it was the most significant call I've ever had.
Wow.
And it was unmistakable.
So if you're watching this program, consider this, no, it could be your call. So what'd you do? I mean, how did you go about it?
Well, I contacted an agency, found out what the process was, and just started in. Okay. And it took me 8 months to get licensed. It's quite an involved process. But I got licensed, and the very next day I had a placement.
Now, you told me that you were surprised that they would accept a single person, and you just kept saying, you realize I'm single, right?
I did. I had this innate fear that even though they kept saying that, yes, it was acceptable and that other people fostered, that when my file finally got to Tallahassee, they would, say, wait a minute, this is a single gal. What are you guys thinking? But my fears were not justified.
It's so interesting. There's so many of our foster families have their own sort of preconceived, it can't possibly be me.
Right.
And whether it's single, or maybe your financial status isn't as strong, your savings account isn't that big, or that kind of thing, there's always this sort of, it must take a superhero.
Yeah.
And yet you realize there's that superhero within, right? All of us have God. If you bring your heart forward for children, I can do it. Suddenly you find a way. Am I too busy? Am I too this? What about the ages of my own children? All of these things are just little roadblocks we've got to work ourselves through. And you realize that so many of our foster and adopted families are everyday heroes. They're our neighbors. They're sitting next to us at church.
Yeah.
And they found a way to do it.
Yeah. We all feel inadequate for what we do. I mean, I think that's part of the human condition. It was what Moses, said to the Lord, surely you can find somebody else better than I am. And so I kind of call that the Moses qualification. If you feel inadequate, probably that's really normal. But let's talk about what qualifies a person. Obviously, you do need to go through some sort of vetting process. But Andrew, you've worked with lots of these families and these kids and background. What are some of the people that you remember that were just really good at what they did? I mean, what made your mom and dad really good at, John and Carolyn, and they were both forces to be reckoned with. What made them good at what they did?
I think a lot of it, they'll tell you it was prayer. I mean, my mother especially actually did a lot of the things that my father didn't even know about. She was so into the adoption aspect, but my father just trusted her and supported her through the process. A lot of, for them, it was who God kind of brought to them and for them to help. They didn't ask a ton of questions when someone would show up to their doorstep. I actually recall being younger, them being a lot more engaged in the process, but part of the house was actually dedicated to bringing in single mothers who had decided to give their child up for adoption, and my parents would help pay for their bills and help facilitate those things. Now, obviously, the laws are a lot more strict, and there's case studies and there's all the other things that are home studies and those things that you have to do for people that are interested in fostering and interested in adoption, and then depending on how many months before or after or days before or after the child is born or the mother leaves the hospital, the father can file certain paperwork to laying claim to the child. But back then, 20 years ago, it was not nearly, or 30, 40 years ago, it was not nearly as strict as it is now. So
when you, let me ask you, Glenn, let me ask you this question. First of all, I'm as Andrew's talking, I'm remembering this young pregnant girl that Becky and I had living with us for a while, and she was just going through such angst about, am I a bad person if I give my child up for adoption? She couldn't take care of him, and she just felt this ringing guilt, of course it was an accidental pregnancy, and so she lived with us for a while, and I told her the story of Moses, Moses' mom, who rather than seeing him come to harm, sent him away, and that was an act of being a good mother. What you deal with a lot of dysfunctional families, or a lot of kids who came from dysfunctional families. When is it a good idea for the safety of the child to say, maybe we ought to, as much as this makes us ashamed, maybe we ought to give them up for adoption? What are those kinds of circumstances?
Well, this work is messy. And when you kind of stop and think about the dynamic of that moment, right? That moment to separate from your child or forcibly separate a child from their parents, either scenario, there are so many things that will charge emotions and complexities and rights and things, as Andrew mentioned. It's messy. And one of the things that I think is so spectacular about our foster parents and our adopted parents is they just focus in on the child, almost to say, like, all that other stuff, I'm just not going to let it distract me. Over the years that I've done this, I just adore them. I just soak up our foster families. We just met, and she's right. She's wonderful already. Because it's just people of such clear, just sort of purity and purpose, and to sort of provide that open heart for a child is really pretty special. And the reality is that a lot of those forces that break a family apart are some of the worst parts of our society, right? Struggle with substances, struggles with mental illness, domestic violence and violent situations that children shouldn't be subject to.
Yeah.
But it's going to happen, and until we really solve those social ills, which I don't think will be tomorrow.
Yeah.
We've got to be here to catch the children that slip through those cracks, and our foster families, our adopted families, are the ones there with their arms out.
Yeah.
They're the ones saying, "I'll step forward and be that catch for that child." It's just they're spectacular.
Let me go to Twyla, because I remember several of your children. I remember, was there an Isaiah? Did you have a little Isaiah? There was a little African American kid. Jesse? Okay, just the cutest kid. Oh my goodness, every time you bring him to church, I just go, I want him. But tell us about some of those kids and what they brought out in you.
Well, you're absolutely right. I never felt that I did anything extraordinary for them, but first of all, I had the best kids. Every one of them was special, and as you would imagine, they all came with their own unique set of circumstances and issues. But what I was witness to in every single circumstance was the transformative power that a regular, consistent, daily routine provided them, and how much it absolutely changed who they were and allowed them to be normal kids.
Yeah. That's what every kid can deal with life if it's predictable, if it's somewhat regular and it has some structure to it. Even in the direst of circumstances, when we were doing when we studied the most recent study on homeless school children. We learned that those children did worse in school who were precariously housed than the very poor who knew what their circumstances were every day.
Right.
Because they had the structure that they needed to deal with it. And kids are tremendously resilient. They can deal with it. So before we come back to you, Glenn, I want to go to Andrew one more time and talk about when you're dealing with your foundation and you're dealing with your desire to get other families involved. How do you find families that are willing to talk about this? How do you find kind of the kinship of other people who have a heart for those outside their own family?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my first mission field is my home. So for me, it's tough for me to go and approach someone and say, this is how you should live your life if I'm not myself taking care of my girls. So I've got two little girls, 9 and 11, Hannah and Ava. They're my first priority. I don't go out certain nights because those are nights with those kids, and those other nights are incredibly busy because of that. But so that's kind of where my first thing I go to is just kind of a check on myself, and I have other gentlemen that help keep me accountable. As far as going out and finding other individuals that need help, God brings a lot of people into my life. I think that's not a coincidence. But then also finding other groups like CBC. We're working with another group called Bridges of Light, which helps with education for underprivileged children. We worked with the New Image Youth Center in downtown Orlando. There's different groups that through the charities I've started in my life that have just kind of come into contact with, and we've been able to work well with them. I've also had to put limitations on how many people I can work with and help, because you just can't do it all. And then when you do try to do it all, you divide your ability. So I rely a lot on my own balance and just making sure that I've got time with my kids, and then the things that I can fit in with the few other organizations and people, I'll try to fit it in.
Well, let me come back to you, Glenn. Let's kind of switch to the more practical side of this. If somebody wants to help, if somebody would say, I wonder what I can do to help with this situation, what are some of the things that are available for them to get involved?
Well, it really doesn't have to be all in, especially at first. And so, you start with a phone call, jump on the website and click contact me. And we'll walk that with you right? We'll walk that journey with you. And the reality is that everybody's circumstance is a little bit different. Everybody's capacities are a little bit different. And we have, some tremendous volunteers that are a mentor. Because that's what they're ready to do right now. And that can be invaluable to a child. You can become some of that stability just because you're there once a week or once a month. For so many of our children, they don't have that consistent adult in their life. And I think the most consistent thing I hear from people that sort of put that toe in the water is, I never realized how much I'd get out of it. I never realized how much they would change me.
Right.
And that always makes me feel really good, right? This isn't a one-way street, and you don't have to be around our kids very long to be inspired by them and their future potential.
Let me ask you a difficult question, and this could be open to all three of you, but there's a human condition that we have, and that is we've got good hearts, but once we get into something, we find it much more difficult than we thought it would be. And so there are people who would be listening right now, and they would say, man, I'd love to help, but what if I get in so over my head, or I get a kid with a behavior problem that I don't know how to deal with this, or even, I'm a big brother and I get called away regularly in my job and I can't show up, and is that going to destroy the kid and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of people with willing hearts, but they're not sure they can carry through. Are there, as we talk about this, there are probably some that say, well, this is the deal, and this is kind of what you sign up. There are other programs that say, okay, we got a safety net. If you have to miss this or if you have to do this, there's kind of there's a group that kind of steps in or makes sure that you didn't totally mess up your part. So I guess I'm just asking from a standpoint of somebody listening. I would love to do something. I don't want to mess it. I don't want to mess a kid up. I don't want to be the one who fails. What do you say to something like that?
Well, a couple of reactions. The first one is the easy one, which is there's lots of people that can help you through that and through those challenges. And it might be a formal part of the sort of professional support network, but it's just as likely to be part of your own network, your good friends, your family that can help you through those problems. But it doesn't diminish the much more difficult part about what kind of can happen in a messy situation, in messy scenarios, right? Child might end up going home and you really aren't sure that the judge made a good decision. A child that really pulls at your heart, and then, grandma maybe emerges, and those emotional strains can be really hard of it.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of times you sit and cry, and you support each other, and you get up and you dust yourself off, and you head back in for the next trip.
Love costs, doesn't it? Twyla, you said something.
I know as a foster parent, there was always a need for respite caregivers. And that is something a little different. Doesn't, require...
Describe what that is. Respite caregivers.
Respite caregivers who are, I assume they go through the same process to be licensed, but when a foster parent has a need to go out of town for business or whatever, that there's someone that can step in.
Short term.
For a very short term basis.
So somebody could be trained even as a respite caregiver.
Yeah.
I'm the person who'll stand in the gap.
Right, and sometimes, just to give foster parents a break.
Yeah.
To have a weekend off.
We've done some of that now around sort of a buddy system, right? So you have a foster parent that maybe is pretty stretched, or maybe there's even a professional sort of pull that on some basis they need a week or 3 days or a weekend off. Is there a family that could kind of partner up with them and be that a familiar support system for the children, but it's not every day.
Right.
Yeah. Is there like an age limitation to this? I mean, is it like...
There's not.
Okay.
Nope. You can...
So even a 70-year-old could...
Even a 7-year-old could... Actually, I looked at the statute last night. So even a 7-year-old... Florida used to have some very strict laws for adoption and fostering. But 70-year-old, 80-year-old, they've got to pass the home study. They've got to, even disabilities, certain disabilities you can still adopt or foster.
Yeah.
They've got to be able to pass the home study and take care of the child, but they're able to.
That's right.
They're able to help the child. They're able to be the different roles that both of these individuals mentioned.
So this has gone way faster than I anticipated it would. This is so intriguing, and everybody, children are the universal heartthrob, I think. But let me just throw this out. We got about a minute left here. Anybody can answer. What do you think is the most important qualification for the care of children?
I personally think consistency. You both mentioned that. I think that's probably in everything we do. That's probably the most consistent. I think that's whether you're a parent of the children at home, whether you're going to do adoption or fostering, whether you're going to work on another issue unrelated, like helping to do cancer research. All of this is just a matter of consistency. And I think one of the things we talked about is that sometimes if you want to do the foster and adoption, you have to say not now because you can't be consistent. And you've got to be able to have the people around you that you had talked to that encouraged you when the time was right.
And I think if you match that with that unconditional heart, right, be that, children feel it. They feel that warmth. They feel that emotion. You match that up with the structure, as Andrew said, that they haven't had, and you'll be amazed at the transformation that's possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. Andrew and Twyla and Glenn, you are heroes of mine. You're doing stuff that I've never done, but I think about it. I do, and I want to just give you these closing comments. It says in James 1:27 that religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress. Now, the kids we're talking about are not all orphans technically, but many of them have been orphaned by circumstances, and they need some care of people with capabilities that will love and give them a predictable environment that they can reach their full potential. And so we ask you to be involved. Those of us with power, those of us who have power to give, either can use it to exploit people or to shield ourselves from their problems or to actually support them. And so we would love for you to be the latter, at least by prayer and maybe more. We thank our panelists again, and remember that these discussions are not just the ones that take place here. We'd love to see you continue the discussions at home or go one step farther, as we have said, get involved. Because when power talks, you are empowered through the voice of truth. See you next time.